All teams have confirmed their presence and have given consent. My panelists will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Wendy. I use they, them pronouns. Best of luck.
I am Rodz. I don't have any preferred pronouns. Good luck, guys.
We'll continue. OBP rules apply. OG, ready when you are. OG,
So I'm audible.
yes, you are.
All right. Thank you. I'll take you guys to chat. That being said, starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. First, understand what does the current status quo look like? It looks like where a world where traditional and conventional gender norms are being reachable. This is because of the rise of like right wing conservatism all over the world. This looks like the bringing voting in of conservative parties in major countries of the world, rise of leaders like Marine Le Pen. All of this means that there is a glorification of conventional norms that exist within all around the world. What does this entail? How are now fashion brands involved with this? Firstly, they can they capitalize with the entire fashion industry within this conventional market and make profit off of it. Why is this bad? It's bad because it amplifies the problematic notion within the society that harms by reinforcing the perceived gender norms that fashion is something that is probably predominantly pursued by women. Meaning, when I'll talk about how that's worse off for women in a bit, but understand that we'd rather uh, that they counteract this in a more inclusive way, which we can do by including men more, men more within the fashion, and thereby trying to reverse the gender norms that exist within the status quo. How does this look like? This look like messages like fashion is for men as well, and how they can they can actually set up more male fashion brands. They can set up research and experiment with fashion. The major fashion brands like H&M, Zara, Louis Vuitton, they can uh, uh, hire more male models, have more male lines of clothing and shoes and bags and stuff. All of this means that a huge amount of message and product is dumped for the male demographic in the status quo, and you'd experiment and find out what these people like and want to do with fashion within the status quo. What does this do? This increases visibility among the entirety of the demographic, because fashion is something that is always trendy and it's changing with time. Meaning, when you actually reach a large number of people, and actually a lot of people follow the models and follow these big brands, and there are more there are the popular people that are actually using these brands and actually staying in coming up on TVs and social media on a regular basis, which increases the visibility and actually normalize the stuff that fashion is something that is actually for men, and actually also for men and not for women, which kind of tries to shift the Overton window to a certain extent. This countervailing challenge to the internalized biases that exist actually helps, because it creates space us it does two things. One, it creates a space for male models, because you now encourage more men to like pursue fashion, because it's not seen as something that is probably not conservatively masculine, and probably you are not tagged as someone who is feminine or homosexual for trying to pursue fashion in the long run. This, first, so firstly, the women who are men who are currently being bullied for trying to pursue fashion or dress well are now perceived as more normal or more uh, cool within the trend. And secondly, it at least takes away one facet of gender norm that's probably some fashion is something that is predominantly pursued by women. And thirdly, it creates an inclusive fashion sector that is more represented. The second thing I want to talk about is how this is actually helpful for the fashion brands and fashion in general. Understand that the male fashion brands has not been uh, explorative enough, and actually these fashion brands are not been much more experimental with the male sector. They're like basic colors, basic uses of usage of fashion in the current status quo. This is important because there is a competitive advantage within the current market. Because understand that uh, the women's market in terms of fashion, specifically in terms of the major fashion brands that existing, is highly saturated because of how different types of fashion items are coming up from time to time, which means that it's harder to create new stuff within that particular women's sector because of how competitive it actually is. But the men's market is somewhat untapped, which means it's easier to actually tap into that market and innovate and try to experiment within that sector and create something better in terms of fashion out of it. Secondly, understand that since that male sector is not very much explored yet, it's easier to set loyal customers to new trends. I'll take CEO.
Given that we already understand that this is about major fashion brands, right? There are already many brands that still cater to men. Why is it so important for major fashion brands to do this? And if so, what is the incentive for like them to actually, get for men to actually buy into this ideal?
It helps my first argument. The messaging is better when it's major fashion brands. So moving on to what I was already saying. Uh, it's easier to create loyal customer bases and the loyal customer bases that you can profit of as a major fashion brand. Lastly, what is fashion in general, right? Fashion is usually an outlet for self-actualization and a part of who you are and how you express yourself as a person. The moment in time you make fashion mostly about women through major fashion brands who sets the messaging for fashion in the biggest stages of the world, that is the moment in time you tell them that it's only a way for self-actualization for women, and men cannot pursue fashion, or even if they can, they cannot be the most best at it. This means fashion is often left as a low-hanging fruit offered to women stuck in restrictive societies as a form of gratification, because now more often than not they cannot pursue more often than not where they cannot pursue other things, they are forced to pursue their self-actualization through fashion. And in at the same time, men who can or who can at the same time try to pursue their self-actualization and extend themselves as a form of fashion are unable to do so because of being restricted through it. For all of these reasons, propose.
We thank the Prime Minister for that speech. We invite the Leader of Opposition to continue the debate. Here.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
There are some background noises. There was just election today or election result today. So yeah, please ignore that. I'll be starting in 10 seconds. Thank you, Keshav. All right. I'll be starting in 3, 2, and 1. Two specific framing that are very important in this debate. A, fashion or these big brands are largely centered on women fashion for their earning, and they are having this expertise in this industry only. But at the same time, men are not. It's not the case that men are wearing nothing. They're also wearing something, which means they are comparative brands and they have different needs also. Which means it was a complete assumption of opening government that they would suddenly go out and crack this market. They had no mechanism. Insofar, it's about expansion. Expansion and production are different just because in expansion you try out new things and try to establish them and market them or stuff like that where you don't have expertise in, but at the same time it requires lots of resources. Our counter model is pretty simple. You don't have to go out and expand. You can just do production, but we just don't want the male influence or male prioritization at that level as women prioritization existing, which means we simply support women to be the center of all this production at the very first place. Second for me is very simple, that probably women fashion or fashion through women is something that's historically very important for women, and it is still very important because it dictates and it decides where this whole feminist ideologies and all these things would go. It actually is a very crucial mechanism in fighting for women's rights and stuff like that, because this is a way that actually shows or that actually makes women feel that they're empowered within society. Note these two things are very crucial, because opening up a economy talking first why these women are comparatively better and why we need prioritization of women to actually establish that in this fashion industry women actually have a voice. Because opening government's idea is utopic, where they're just assuming that probably both would be 50%. That's not happening. We would prove at opening opposition that probably when male would enter at 50% level, they would just dominate the market, and then women won't have as much of power, directly proving that why women who are having historical value with this fashion industry won't be relevant anymore, which means that harm, and this is the biggest harm because this outweighs any other harm. Even if government just comes out and prove that fashion is much better, that's not important, just because men can wear anything, and even if they're not fashionable, it's fine. But even if they're not wearing these major brands, that the other brands which can be fashionable, that's not a burden. Insofar we can just prove that women are better, these movements are better, the representation are better, we outweigh them. But how is that happening? I think first, how does this prioritization looks like? This prioritization looks like you're now focusing and you're now giving opportunities to more and more women only and very few men. This specific bias is super important because society is not 50% or 50% equal, right? Society is biased towards men. It's a patriarchal world. No, this is important. Largely men don't go to fashion industry just because in fashion industry women are preferred and there are very less vacancy and seats for these kind of men. But the more time there are more seats for men, they would opt into it. But this would make things tougher for women just because women need specific reservation or specific seat to get these kind of place, just because society they're not supported as much. How does this looks like? Man can go out and do anything they want, but for a woman they have to get their parents permission for that. They don't have those spaces created, they don't have those pathway created that man have, right? I mean, what would happen when you would allow 50% or maybe half space for man? These men would just enter too much, and now women won't be entered to that extent, which means this would rather look 70% men or 30% women, just because men had more capacity to go out and enter this industry. They had more financial resources, because still in the world women are not financially as much independent as men are financially independent. That impact of this is within this industry there would be unbalance that would be created just because women are being restricted in the society, just because they are vulnerable and just because they don't have as much resources as men, which means this is unfair. But at the same time, why men would dominate the industry and why this would look like that fashion is now all about men and not about women, directly reporting the OG and also proving that why women fashion and all this historical value and all those channel to just go out and talk about feminism is going to be lost, simply because men fashion is first of all very monotonous. This is important. Monotone, some big brand is going to bring these kind of special thing. It's going to be a short-term boom in the industry. Lots of men would go and see into this, which means viewership for short-term would be completely centered on man only. This is important because the monotone viewership would completely center on man. Already the women model and stuff like that would get less representation for that small time also. But this is important. The monotone men who are largely the brand earners in the society actually watch that thing for short term. What would happen is these companies, these advertisements would also be centered on man only. They would try to focus on man only. This is very important, which means now the whole thing or perception of this company and all this fashion would largely be centered around man, losing the ideal essence of women being the center at the same time. But at the same time, the more time male models are much more idealized, female models won't get that much recognition. They won't get as much space just because probably male models are getting a traction because companies want to focus on brand earners because they have better spending capabilities. These are big, like major companies only. So everything on advertisement or all the things would be centered on these kind of female center on these kind of male only, and this is why female representation won't be existing anymore. And this is why this short boom of famousness is bad. But why this is worse? Just because when male actors would come out and join these kind of thing, these male actors likely have bigger following as compared to female actors, just because of this is how society looks like. Male people get, or male actors have bigger following in Instagram and stuff like that, which means when they would go out and do these kind of ramp walks, this would get much more traction, which means female representation in this industry would be comparatively much more less. This is probably bad because it would dilute the historical value that this industry used to hold for a woman. Which means if a model goes out and say anything against casting calls or stuff like that, it won't hold as much value for the industry, or it won't bring as much change, just because this thing is something that's not as much traction or as much important, because women don't hold that much value, just because for women also perception of this whole thing of fashion has changed. Before I go any further, yeah, opening comment.
Do you think it was bad to include plus size models when fashion brands made clothes specifically catered to them?
I think I simply explained that why, even if that's happening, complete traction would be you're just not introducing them. They're gonna get lots of traction. I have proven that. But insofar I have proven that why women rights are comparatively better, we are winning just because impact of this is much better view. But at the same time, we are giving women to go out and express themselves as they have been doing historically. We are actually giving them the power to just go out and historically align with all those heroes. The moment men will take over the fashion industry, they won't be able to align with all those historical fashion centered women who have changed the world, right? This is bad because they won't be able to idealize them. They won't even dream in lots of cases to become a model. Company is better just because they opposite. Opening government can never come up and claim that, company would just go out and crack that market, because the other competitors have better blockchain, better supply chain, better, requirement fulfillment. And the more time this company goes out and expands in that way and markets in that way, center on man, they would lose the essence. They would use different colors, they would use different batches or stuff like that, different designs. This would lead to now its essence being lost, since this company is largely still centered on women and its expertise is in women. Women would actually feel alienized by this, and less women would opt into this, and they would spend for other things. For example, other brands which are comparatively cheaper, just because those are better option and more feminine option. And this is why probably companies are also worse, just because they can't crack into market and they would lose the primary base.
I thank the leader of opposition for that speech. We invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debates.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Cool. Wait me a second. Keyboard doesn't. POS in the chat. Right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. When men like Aziz Ansari are assumed to be gay, when men like people like Chris Hemsworth or like Ryan Reynolds are assumed to be homosexuals because of their good fashion sense, or like entire opposition bench would just stay silent and let these fashion brands do nothing. When be like, sure, these might be actors who can defend themselves, but then you realize Ashrafee's entire extension about how this applies to little children who want to look good but end up being bullied in schools. This is about young teenagers who want to like come off as like present themselves properly but get bullied because it comes off as being effeminate or being homosexual. All of these harms still stand because opening opposition decides to give this zero form of engagement. For any of the arguments to stand, you still need to do the arbitrary weighing of why women models are far more important than the certain stakeholders that we talk about. Insofar as we can ensure that women models are not going to be essentially harmed that much, and even if they are harmed to a certain extent, then we can mitigate that to a large extent. The massive social norms that we can change are far more important. I'll do 3 things in this speech. First, talk about the direct rebuttals to opening opposition. Second, I want to talk about gender norms again. And third, I want to talk about the purpose of fashion brands and integrate why specifically we want major fashion brands to do this. So first, in terms of opening opposition, we get 2 contributions from them. The first is that their counterfactual is one where they're going to prioritize women, but still produce men apparel side by side. This still means that this lacks visibility because there isn't enough amount of advertisement, enough amount of exposure to male models or male apparel, or enough amount of messaging surrounding catering to male consumers, i.e. there is no form of appreciation for the way they dress. There is no form of welcoming tone to get them hooked onto fashion in the first place. In order to undo intrinsic internal biases that fashion is only for women, we believe that you need repetitive triggering, i.e. you need to remind men that this is something that is welcoming for you to a large extent. This means opening opposition's mitigatory counterfactual to deal with Ashrafee's first extension falls apart because they have to deal with repetitive actual triggering in order to reverse people's mindsets. That is incredibly important. What is the weighing here? We would posit that the scale of visibility is important to counteract intrinsic biases because under opposition, effeminate men still get zero forms of protection, which brings me to the second point about reversing of gender norms. Right now in status quo, people just assume fashion to be something just restricted for women. That is not something that men ought to go into. Opening opposition's response to this is, but men wear certain things as well. Sure, but men wear things that they give no thoughts about. This does not mean that they don't want to self-actualize. This does not mean that they don't want to individualize themselves. This does not mean that they don't want to explore certain styles and whatnot. The problem then becomes, firstly, people who actually want to express themselves end up coming off as effeminate. This means that people question their masculinity. That is exactly why when Andrew Garfield wears pink sweaters, he's called a soy boy and he's considered not to be a man enough. Opening opposition might live in the liberal bubble where they might think, but Andrew Garfield just reacts or acts in the liberal echo chambers anyway, so that's fine. But that's not the same case for people in high schools. That's not the same case for people in universities who are like, these are men who maybe want to express themselves in different ways, which society would not accept them so because there is no apparent increased amount of visibility for different forms of preferences or ability to express themselves. The second claim that we got from opening opposition was about how women will not enter these states. We would realistically, what is the percentage of actual shift here? In status quo, there might be 10% of representation for male apparel. We would maybe expand this to 30%. This definitely means that there might be a lot of some form of exposure for women, but this is not going to this isn't necessarily significant to an extent where they lose out on a massive amount of jobs. But secondarily, let's assume this is going to be 50-40, or this is maybe going to be 51-49, or even 60-40 in terms of representation for men, i.e. men just get more representation. We would even still posit that opposition pigeonholes women into this only concentrated industry, where the only available job for women becomes the fashion industry. This is where exactly Ashrafee's point about how you give low-hanging fruits to women that, you have the fashion industry to work in. If you're just sad, just buy some clothes for yourself. All of these low-hanging fruits to pigeonhole women into restrictive societies goes away because we would actually want them to do these jobs if they are interested in them, not because it's the only option left for them. If the worst case scenario is so bad that we have to defend that a lot of women lose out on jobs, we would posit that states are still have some form of obligation to their citizens. Obviously, they would not sit around and see that a large chunk of educated women, because models do tend to be very educated to a large extent, are losing out on jobs or are living unemployed. Presumably, governments will try to counteract with some form of social welfare or some form of social incentives to ensure that more women get hired. The implication of all of this is either opposition has to concede that the harm that talk about is not massively significant, or second, if it is so significant, they're actually being constrictive by pigeonholing women into societies that are bad for them, where only their standards are ridiculed and they're subjected to more scrutiny. CEO, go.
Given that we've already established that fine, men can be patriarchal, people can still call people gay if they are, they wear dressed differently. How is this actually going to be done or better improved in a world where more men are actually in modeling or whatever? It wasn't proven by you.
Oh yeah, the Ashrafee did prove him. Ashrafee's mechanism or analysis here is pretty simple. The reason why people can't accept men in fashion is because of there is a lack of visibility, because this seems like a very alien concept to them. If you have lived in societies where your dad only wore jeans throughout his life, or only wore the same 2 pairs of sweater throughout his entire life, you don't feel like this is something that is acceptable for men to do. But when you see more and more men doing this, when you see huge adverts, huge billboards, messages on TV, on the shows that you watch between intermission in a movies, in the theaters, or even during different types of advertisement campaigns, you are repetitively bombarded with this messaging that it is fine to dress nicely if you're a man. You do not only have to wear wife beaters or a pair of loafers. It is completely fine if you want to wear a suede suit. If it's completely fine if you want to dress yourself differently. These repetitive forms of messaging are the ones that first take away these forms of visibility. But secondarily, in terms of proximity, in terms of familiarity biases, you only saw your mom or your sister being invested in cosmetics, being invested in fashion. Now you give your counteractual evidentiary model that I guess this is not something that is restricted to men. This is something that people soften up over time because of this increased amount of things, protected time. Then the question becomes, why do major brands should be doing this? Because major brands are firstly are positioned pretty well because of their existing supply chains. Things like H&M, Zara, Ralph Lauren, they already have existing supply chains that they can just use for making clothes for men. Secondarily, they have capacity to attract talents in terms of models or even new designers because of the brand recognition and the higher salary. Third, you can do just PR campaigns or ads and billboards. This means you have the capacity to do so, and the Ashrafee explained you have the incentive to do so because you want to tap into a newer market. The weighing therefore becomes men learn to accept themselves, to explore newer fashions. For every single child stuck in a school who wants to just try out new forms of burgundy pants, we would happily want to propose.
Thank the speaker for that speech. We invite the DLO to continue the debate here.
Here.
DLO.
I'm here, just starting. I'll take closing comment. I think Keshav is closing. Cool. Sorry for keeping you waiting. All right. I'll just self-time myself now. Starting speech in 3, 2, 1. Entire DPM speech is explaining why men don't opt into fashion because of, let's say, they have lesser visibility, and the solution they provide to this is that you probably have more visibility on their side, so men opt into fashion. The problem with this is that men don't opt into fashion not because of, let's say, lesser visibility or lesser access to clothes. They are already present in abundance, but there are greater reasons to this. This is probably societal stigma that exists around men fashion with respect to this. But I think secondly, upon the idea of masculinity as well, I think on their side of the house, you don't have these sort of gender neutral clothes to exist. At the point in time, you go ahead and prioritize these sort of things to begin with, as to we are going ahead and then saying prioritizing that this sort of male centric fashion is going to be prioritized, right? Which means that I think this takes away this sort of scope that you have to probably incorporate more gender neutral clothes to begin with, which I think Andrew Garfield wants to wear, which they claim, right? At the point in time, this is true. I think the entire thing, and also why men don't wear fashion on their side of the house, up to what extent I think the reason is also something that is ingrained in patriarchy to begin with, right? And I think more reasons to it is probably financial incentive. I think the patriarchal society probably looks like men is a breadwinner of this particular family. They're not as much prioritized with respect to this. I think they also sacrifice with respect to this. I think this is also something that is an elitist idea to begin with, which means that I think people who are rich or probably active into fashion are going to actively pursue it regardless, right? No matter what. But then what is the delta with respect to all of this, right? I think on our side of the house, the metric is simple, right? I think first, as to why you have, I think, greater cultural shift with respect to empowerment of women, which is likely going to be worse. I think first thing I want you to note, how this sort of fashion industry is important for women. I think this is a patriarchal dominated society. I think even Elo says the problem is that I think this is also the only industry wherein women are also in very powerful or influential position, which are probably top leadership positions to begin with, which probably looks like designer or probably heads of a lot of industries or companies to begin with. I think at the point in time, this is true when you just allow this sort of shift on their side of the house to probably go ahead and then prioritize men fashion more because you want more traction. The problem is that I think the idea that men fashion is something that is largely untapped into is something that's causes this sort of, I think, artificial demand to begin with, which means that men are now going to be incentivized, or probably this sort of societal shift happens, which means that you don't allow this sort of equity to begin with in terms of, empowering women in terms of these power positions. But I think women now have lesser bargaining power in terms of being in those positions because they now have to compete against these sort of counter male aparts, right? But I think this is slightly going to be bad for women simply because of this. I think, but also I think OG's idea with respect to how this is something that is largely this is largely backward to begin with. No, right? I think idea of fashion and how women have used it is something that is largely inclusive. Why I think this is something that women have so far used to probably empower themselves and to probably raise a lot of body positivity, etc., things, right? Which means that fashion is something that is very important for them to empower. But I think this is also something that has been used to probably empower body positivity. And I think a lot of out of the stuff or probably non-conventional fashion senses to begin with, which is probably gender neutral. But I think they say that fashion is not inclusive to begin with. I think on our side of the house, this is going to be more inclusive. Why? I think you don't prioritize this sort of male fashion, which is probably masculine, which is already having some sort of preconceived societal expectations as to how this is going to look like, which means that the gender neutral or the sort of female fashion that is to be there takes a backseat on their side of the house, which probably looks like the amount or the chances of you probably creating out some sort of gender neutral clothes is something that largely vanishes on their side of the house, which means that you now have lesser capacity. But also upon the idea of how the counterfactual can also work out. I think it's simple, right? You don't simply expand upon men's fashion on their side of the house, on our side of the house, but you may try to expand it, I think, in all diagonals with respect to promoting probably targeting unhealthy beauty standards that exist, and also secondly with respect to the idea of you promoting more gender neutral clothes. I think this is something that can be done, and I think this sort of this can bring in a lot of opt-ins with respect to whatever OG has claimed so far. I think visibility that they talk about is not going to accrue them anything because of the social stigma that exists around women wearing fashion. And I think also why women are more into fashion is simply because I think this is something that is societally ingrained within the thing, right? Which means they are supposed to be a certain way, and I think they are expected to be probably the way I think the entire patriarchal society. But I think what are the then extensions following? I think what are the metrics upon which we win this debate? When I wrote the first mechanism as to why they don't survive is that probably I think given men fashion is something that is largely untapped into, there is a lot of artificial demand that is created in the begin with. But I think men also go ahead and then compete with them. I think a lot of powerful positions that women currently have are likely going to be underrepresented, which probably looks like I think them not getting that much chance with respect to representing themselves as models. But I think a lot of counterparts existing, etc. Before I go ahead, I'll take CG. Keshav.
Women's market is not cynical, it is not expansive because you're currently relying on existing female consumers who are pushed.
Women market is not expensive, but it is more certain to begin with, right? Why this is more certain? I think given all of the analysis that we have given, women are probably the leading fashion bearers, but also because of the variety that exists with respect to this. I think in comparison to that, the reasons that we give to you as to men, I think this is the second analysis as to, I think this is a chance that this company falls out. I think there is one chance this probably creates some sort of artificial demand, which means that greater demand happens to men fashion at the point in time you prioritize this on their side of the house. This sort of artificial demand that is created on their side of the house is likely going to be bad because this eats up space for women fashion and a lot of women empowerment. But I think second piece of analysis or the extension that I want to do here is that probably this sort of tactic also backfires for these companies, which is the most important thing to note, right? I think on a comparative, given that how I think there is more stigma around men's fashion, I think, and because of the reasons we have given with respect to patriarchal society and them not able to buy into it, I think men probably who are not that sort of well off with respect to the things, right, who don't want to experiment much, you don't untap into this entire thing, right? Which means that you have greater losses for this particular company in the longer run. On the comparative, when you just stay sort of neutral, you prioritize women's fashion more or probably gender neutral clothes on their side of the house, on our side of the house, you probably have greater market, right? And you're probably tapping into these probably certain consumers who are probably very loyal to you, who probably don't opt out of this particular thing, right? Which means that I think on the idea of certainty as to where you have greater returns with respect to this company, I think we tell you that on their side of the house, given that this sort of shift is going to be there, I think there is initial investment which could look like uncertain ROI with respect to if men would consume it or not. But I think at the point in time this doesn't happen, I think you have more cut-off layoffs which happen, right? Which means that a lot of artisans and this entire company or industry suffers to begin with. But I think women are the most certain buyer. I think you want to tap into them, but also gender neutral. For the metric of certainty as to where you would have probably be certain returns, I think we should stay and we should oppose.
We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech and for ending the opening half for us. We invite a member of government to start the closing half. Here.
Hi, can I be seen and heard?
Yes, you can.
Just a second. I guess I can be seen better now. Cool. Keshav going as the member of club. For the POIs, I'll try to take OG if sorry OO. If not OO, then C. I'll prioritize opening. Please put it through the chat. I'll definitely clear. If I don't do take POI by 5:30, you can vocalize it. Yes. Cool. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Go. The current female fashion industry already benefits from high cultural and commercial investment because the fashion industry is structurally designed around female consumers. It is evident through three things. One, advertising and media focus, where fashion weeks, magazines, and influencer markets heavily cater to women. Two, the retail space dominance, which means department stores allocate larger sections to women's wear compared to men's wear. Three, research and development priority, innovation, which means innovation in female fashion from sustainable fabrics to fit diversity far outpaces men fashion. Why does this justify? What does this mean for this bid then? One, women's fashion is not suffering from investment or lack of attention, whereas men's fashion industry lacks the same amount of institutional and cultural backing. So the certainty in return from the current level of investment is something that does not go away from female fashions at all points in time. This effectively going to example. But the second thing, we think that the female market in the market is just less price sensitive and more resilient. How? Because one, women are already conditioned to go and spend more frequently on clothing than men. Two, brand loyalty is stronger due to established purchasing habits, influencer-driven marketing, and social expectations. But then three, price elasticity, which means women fashion consumers are less price sensitive, because they already are accustomed to regular spending and trend participation. So then, two things on the setup on what the current male fashion industry appears like. One, you already have you have shifting consumer behavior that show men are now willing to invest more in fashion. Why? Because one, traditional male consumption was rooted in necessity rather than choice, meaning men historically bought clothing based on functionality rather than style. However, note, now Gen Z and millennials are breaking the trend as they see fashion as an important part of their identity. This leads to three things. One, the rise of streetwear and luxury brandwear, which looks like brands like Supreme, Off-White, and Nike collaborating with high fashion. Two, you have social media influencers and male celebrities pushing diverse fashion choices, making self-expression to clothing more socially acceptable. Three, men spending on health, skincare, grooming, and accessories are signaling a broader shift in attitude towards personal aesthetics for men then. But the second thing under this, one, second thing, note that menswear is growing faster than women's wear globally, because menswear is now outpacing women's wear in growth rate, especially in emerging markets like China, India, and Southeast Asia. Second thing under this is that luxury brands have already identified this trend, with brands like Gucci, Balenciaga, Louis Vuitton already going significantly increasing their menswear offering. Three, mass market fashion brands must go and follow these suits to remain competitive rather than being left behind in a changing industry. So the extension on CG is going to be simple. We think that markets grow on our side of the case. How? One, and just creates a self-sustaining industry that drives employment growth. How? One, expansion of men's fashion requires large-scale employment growth, because fashion brands currently allocate majority of their resources to women's fashion, with men's section being underdeveloped in comparison. We think that prioritizing men as a primary consumer base means building an entire new sector within existing fashion brands that requires expansion in three things. One, design teams, as more specialized menswear designers are needed to go and develop tailored collection from casual to high fashion. Two, manufacturing and production, which means increased demand means that factories need more workers to produce men's clothing at scale. Three, retail sector, which looks like expanding men's department means you have more skilled employees, managers, and visual merchandise to cater to male shoppers then. Why does this lead to long-term job creation then? I have three ways to go into this. A, you have unlike seasonal shift of employment, expanding into a new consumer base means permanent workforce expansion. Two, as men's fashion becomes more profitable, companies reinvest in scaling up production, marketing, and distribution that creates more demand for labor. This looks like how the rise of sneaker culture and streetwear transform men's fashion from a niche into a dominant force, leading to a sustained job creation in sportswear, luxury, and casual brands. Second, we think that men's fashion industry grows as demand increases, because the historical position of fashion as women's interest means that many men have limited engagement with fashion in the first place. However, when major brands actively go in market and normalize men's fashion, the consumer base expands, which means more demand equals more investment in the industry. This looks like how you have new men's brand emerging, like starts from existing brands diversifying, creating new businesses and more jobs. This also looks like two, luxury brands scale their men's divisions, like higher brands invest more in bespoke tailoring, streetwear, and accessories that is further expanding the industry. Three, you have growth of male fashion influencers and media. This looks like more fashion journalists, bloggers, and stylists that are needed to go and meet new consumer industry at this particular point in time. This leads to a more sustainable market growth at this particular point in time. How? Once the perception of fashion shifts, men become repeat customers. That's leading to long-term stability within this market. Then, second, the industry follows the same trajectory as women's industry, where new product categories become normalized and necessary. Then, this looks like how in early 2000s, sneaker brands like Nike and Adidas were male-dominated but limited to sportswear. As market expanded, the streetwear became a global industry that is sustaining millions of jobs in design, retail, and production. Then, the third thing, then, how you are able to now get job growth in supporting industries, which is particularly crucial. We think that expanding in fashion, men's fashion, creates demand that is beyond clothing production. And four things, then. One, textile production, because more factories and mills are needed to go and produce male-centric fabrics and designs. Two, e-commerce and tech, because growth in men's online shopping means you have higher demands for software engineers, UX designers, and AI-driven shopping in the experience that can exist in the first place. But then three, you just have better logistics and supply chain existing at all points in time, because more products are required for warehousing, shipping, delivery workers to handle distribution of all men. But then last, you have growth of male fashion influencer media, because more fashion journalists, bloggers, and stylists are needed to go and meet this consumer's interest, or to go and promote this brands, etc., etc. Why does this all of this create an economic ripple effect? One, every new fashion sector creates a secondary economic opportunities that is ensuring job creation across multiple industries. Two, once male consumers become brand loyal, fashion brands invest in continuous production and innovation that is keeping demands in high production and high in design, retail, and supply chains. Then this looks like how the explosion of male grooming products started as a niche but became mainstream once companies normalized marketing to men, creating jobs in cosmetic, advertising, dermatology. But then, how do you benefit minorities from all of this? Notice that one, you have increased competition in men's fashion industries at lower prices. Currently, why exactly do we want that thing? Note that in the current status quo, men pay more than women for quality products, quality clothing, due to lack of variety, competition, and scale in men's fashion clothing. Because fewer brands cater to men, so companies price products higher due to low production volumes. In we think that expanding the industry forces brand to compete, driving mass production, price reductions, and affordability. This means one, more retailers, which means price competition prevents monopolistic pricing by premium brands. Two, larger market share as consumers enter, economies of scale make clothes that are cheaper at this particular one time. Three, you have more budget-friendly options, because increased demand ensures that brands create quality clothing at various price points, that is including affordable and mid-range fashion. What this does is that one, men especially from low-income backgrounds gained access to stylish and high-quality clothing without financial strain. Two, a diverse industry means that men are no longer forced into premium price brands due to lack of options at this particular point in time. But then we think that you just normalize affordable professional social wearing for men, because in the current status quo, women have access to budget-friendly formal wear, but men's suits, dress shoes, and professional wear disproportionately unaffordable. On our side, then, men who go and struggle to go and afford high-price formal and social wear can now access this better clothing for job opportunities and better personal expression. And for all those reasons, I'm very, very proud to propose.
We thank the member of government for that speech. We invite the member of opposition to continue the debate. Yeah.
All right, just to check that I'm audible. Hello?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll take POIs through the mic. And yeah. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think the closest thing that all of us understand about the fashion industry is probably watching The Devil Wears Prada, where you have Meryl Streep going on and on about like whether cerulean is good or the teal is good, and somehow Andy just like gets put in a place, and that's the best thing that I can compare, where all of us have the fashion industry knowledge at hand, right? So a few responses that I have towards whatever opening brought up and to what CG has brought up today. So number one, how opening has talked about how fashion is basic for men as of today in the fashion industry. Secondly, they've talked about how men are not accepted in fashion because of the visibility that's catered towards women, and we talked about how brand visibility is not quite there. And then CG talked about the shift in consumer behavior, right? So first things first, understand that our side is logically prior to what opening has brought up. Understand that men are not as fashion conscious as women are. Yes, there will be some dudes who will buy the occasional Uniqlo or H&M or Zara, etc. But a mass majority of the market goes towards women at the end of the day. Secondly, even if fashion for men does exist, men just don't buy into it because of patriarchal standards, right? They still think fashion is like girly or uncool to buy stuff now because of the social conditioning that they've been ingrained since when they're younger. For example, which is why dudes are likely to wear the same shirt every single week. And then OG also didn't prove effectively why men will be incentivized to buy into this. Thirdly, women are still suffering under heavy patriarchy states, which is why women are harder to climb the career ladder or get even maternity leave at the end of the day. Understand that women need a safe space in the working world, and the fashion industry provides that avenue compared to other industries at the end of the day, right? So it's not like STEM industries where women don't have the avenue to get into. Secondly, men being not accepted into fashion because of visibility, it just does not really stand. Number one, this is untrue because you still have men modeling in ad campaigns. You still have celebrities such as, Jeremy Allen White wearing Calvin Klein, or you still have celebrities such as Lewis Hamilton wearing Tommy Hilfiger as the fashion brand, and men are still represented in the fashion industry. Understand that celebrities like men or high-profile men are still, or even other men are doing crossover mixed-up brands with stuff such as Uniqlo, H&M. It still exists where the male design is still existent and still stands. Even if men are not visible, they still have other avenues in other predominantly male industries to do so. For example, STEM, in culinary, where you have Gordon Ramsay taking the front helm of the culinary world. It looks like having men dominating stuff such as law, politics, etc. Right? So see the brand's visibility, which you talked about in opening, right? Understand that niche brands still exist, and they tend to be more straight heteronormative focused because of the patriarchy standards as of today. Even if large brands try to push the boundaries to focus on men, it is still difficult, panel, because patriarchy is embedded into our systems, and men do not want these changes in our patriarchy system as a whole. Even if the best case, it is still more important for women to be included because they are the most vulnerable minority minority groups at the end of the day. For example, it looks like more representation in female sportswear. It looks like having better female swimwear where it's not kind of the most weirdest places where your boobs are hanging out. It looks like having better presentation for Black women in the fashion industry as a whole, right? So understand also that closing government also brought about the shift in consumer behavior. It is, yes, this may be fair, but when you change the consumer behavior towards men, it is still unlikely how these men are still going to spend money on these fashion or like these retail outlets, and whether they will be incentivized to buy these things. Even if they do buy these things, consumer base will still push out a large portion of women away from these conversations when you have male-centric designs. For example, fashion that does not cater to women's body proportions, or for example, modest fashion for Muslim or religious women, or even body plus size women. So why is this? Because it's unlikely that these designs will continue to cater for gender minorities or body minorities when you deprioritize women. That's why, as of recent years, you only now have hijabi fashion. Like in Nike, where you have the hijab design, and the plus fashion designs are more inclusive. So what happens from there? Number one, you have better inclusivity. Secondly, you have more revenue because your expansion of products and designs towards different people in the society. Thirdly, it looks like ongoing innovations for these type of people. Before I go into my characterization and substantives, any PRIs?
So even if in the worst case scenarios, men are not interested in being fashionable, at least we give them options to access them insofar as they are, because you can't just assess and blatantly say they're not interested because the options do not exist for them to assess that.
I did say even if men still have interest in fashion, it is still a vast majority of these men who still are not interested, which is why it is more likely for men to probably buy a shirt like twice a year or wear the same shirt every single day, right? So a few like recharacterizations, right? So understand that when you do not prioritize men as much, you're one, creating a lot of economic capital under the fashion industry because the consumer and the industry takes up a lot of women. Second, alienating women from these opportunities in these fashion industries is just harmful and leaves them to be vulnerable where they don't have the right amount of protection for them. Three, better empowerment looks like inclusivity in ads and modeling where these different bodies and physical attributes exist and not just like straight blonde women, etc. So two questions are answered in my substantives. How does the fashion industry provide better opportunities and how does it protect women? Why is this true? Number one, because the consumer base of fashion industry, again, it is primarily women, especially in a world where then women have been sidelined in many industries such as STEM and politics and law and such as like all these things. Like fashion was the avenue for these women to be elevated and empowered and to get these opportunities in the first place. Secondly, this is because patriarchy has kept these women to a standard of not being able to enter these spaces, which is why the fashion industry is predominantly dedicated to women. Thirdly, when you have a buying of women in these industries, in these areas, these companies need to maintain a standard or else there'll be a likelihood of these women being pushed out, right? So why is this important? And why are we logically prior to opening, right? Number one, this prevents the male design bias in women's fashion, design, modeling, etc. Secondly, this looks like men having a same advertising where the marketing is sexually provocative or the dress design is uncomfortable for the women where you're I don't know, if something's hanging out somewhere, I don't even know, and even pushing really weird body standards into the models. Three, when you have opportunities and empowerment, when you prioritize women, number one, it provides avenues for economic growth and creative expression for these women. For example, it's like unique designs. Again, that is stay away from the male bias gaze and so forth. Because women are more considerate and more inclusive in that regard, they understand that women have different body types and different needs at the end of the day. Number 4, it looks like pushing unique boundaries of fashion that are female centric, i.e., again, jeans that actually have pockets and blouses that are cut, in like weird areas are such less. And this sort of male bias design is exempting women from who can actually buy this fashion by the clothes at the end of the day. So what then is the impact? Right? Number 1, we tell you that we allow fashion, one of the only traditionally progressive fields that opts for women to be, that does not get tainted by men, because we want to protect these women. We want to ensure that these inclusivity movements and empowerment. Secondly, it looks like inevitably leading to more male involvement. What happens then? Men will be following the male gaze fashion. It'll be sexually objectifying the women and catering to the women designs to be more provocative. There'll be less women-centric products and it'll be like less female gaze. And thirdly, when they're prioritized, they often are socially towards the other minorities, become more inclusive, and there'll be better optics for women at the end of the day. And for that, I'm very proud to oppose.
Thank the member of opposition for that speech. We advise the government to close the case for the government side.
Hello, just give me a minute and then I'll start.
Okay.
Hello, can I have my timer on the screen if it's possible?
I'll do that. Just a second.
Cool, thank you.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Cool.
Cool. Hi everyone, Akshita Kumar, going as the Gov Whip. Preferred pronouns she/her. Preferred mode of taking a POI would be via the chat. Let me just open the chat. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Starting my speech on a self counter of 3, 2, 1, go. Directly engaging with the CEO's case and like whatever they bring to us. If men can create clothes for women, then women can equally make clothes for men as well, right? Which means that the problem that currently is that there exists a binary between women and men's fashion, limiting the male consumers that are there to go ahead and partake into fashion, simply because fashion as a concept is something that is not accessible to men at all. So if you go ahead and you tell me that patriarchy is going to go ahead further alienate women, etc., you need to realize the involvement of women in the manner which it is currently in the fashion industry, which is as a sexualized object, which means at a point in time you go ahead and do not give other alternatives of other genders partaking into the concept of fashion. You are promoting the idea of this patriarchal idea of women being the sole consumers of fashion industry, of women being the sole bearers of fashion industry, which is the problem that is both something there on both sides of the opposition houses, right? They think that the way to go ahead and solve patriarchy is to promote women fashion industry, but it is to promote women creators and not women consumers, given that the consumer market is something that is already been created and already exists, which means that it can self-sustain at a point in time, shift focus and give chance to other genders to being equally partaking in the concept of fashion and to go ahead and practice that, right? Which means that the issue is audience and consumers, that is not economically beneficial to the fashion industry as a whole. Keshav comes ahead and he gives like a proper mechanization as to how market is something that is extremely important to this entire concept of unlocking what representation and inclusion means to the fashion industry, right? We go ahead and tell you that without market partaking in this entire part, this thing is simply not possible. So we go ahead and tell you that at a point in time you want to go ahead and expand the fashion industry as a whole, and you want to impact more and more people, and you want to be more economically beneficial, then you have to go ahead and partake in this entire thing of going ahead and promoting fashion as an acceptable option to men. Men are not fashion coded according to CO, but there will never be fashion coded if you keep it restricted solely to the area of a specific gender, and if you continue to fuel this gender without allowing other genders to take part in it, right? Now, secondly, again, to reiterate the point, it perpetuates stereotypes, which aids in maintaining patriarchy rather than opposing it, right? Now, to give like substantial arguments as to how this works in opposition to whatever the CO's case is, we have seen that men's fashion reduces social stigma around clothing, right? If you go ahead and see, if you like if you have to go to like some sort of flea market, or if you have to go to some second-hand store, you have to see that there is whole lot of accessibility for women and none for men. There is a whole lot of stuff that women can go ahead and buy. They can buy cheap clothes at any point of time they decide to go ahead to second-hand clothing, right? But men can't do the same, which means that clothing as an alternative comes more expensive to men than it does to women, which is something that Keshav already fleshes out. But then to reiterate it again, we take this argument on the basis of accessibility, which means that we are making clothes more accessible to both people. Because see, clothes is not just something you wear, but it is also the way you express yourself. If by the market, the fashion industry runs on optics, right? If you're limiting that optic to male going ahead and wearing neutral base shirts as they themselves claim, which means that men will believe that this is what
Lian.
fashion is for men, which means that after the 5th minute of my speech clearly, and if you go ahead and you do not promote the idea of men engaging into extravagant fashion, or what fashion truly stands for, self-expression, you're never going to realize that potential that there exists, right? Which then also means that at a point in time there is limited accessibility at local level. You're not going to promote the industry as a whole. What is beneficial to the industry, fashion industry, is that this thing becomes locally rooted and people go ahead and then partake into it, given that then it also realizes this thing where now men have larger second-hand markets. They have larger assistance to that, right? Which means that even in NGOs, if there are clothing option only available for women and children, then you can go ahead and expand that to men as well, right? Then, coming on to the opening half. Firstly, the opening government. The openings are simply raising extreme arguments and cases with like limited mech. In opening government, skittles between the social impacts and outcomes and is unable to give the key that unlocks their case of representation. That key is our economic explanation of markets, how markets work, and how they lead to more inclusion than what and how the OG proposes, right? They lack in proper impactations which can solidify what they aim to preserve. They don't introduce the current problems of fashion as an industry faces, which is something we do. On our side of the paradigm, market unlocks inclusion that they wish to pursue and prove. We prove how we need more men consumers to unlock the deadlock. We also prove how major brands are the way to do so, because they give way to local and grassroots companies to foster this.
Lian.
If the brands do this, yes, you
Your case is hinged on one idea that these companies would be successful, but don't you understand that these men are already wearing some companies? Prove me why they would defeat those other companies to prove that any of the thing you're saying would be successful at
Right,
any
right.
point.
Right. As I multiple times I have mentioned, to unlock representation, you need to go ahead and unlock market alternatives as well. We're talking about how these things will be successful because we want men consumers to partake in the success. If you don't have enough enough men siding with the concept of fashion, you're never going to break that stereotype. For breaking that stereotype, you have to have better optics, which is something I've already explained in my speech, right? Then on to the point that I was mentioning, if major brands go ahead and do this, which means that the local and grassroots companies will follow, which means, again, to reiterate, you will have better accessibility on our side of the paradigm. And finally, to go ahead and cover the opening opposition's case, fashion is for all people who wish to engage with the concept, right? So they go ahead and said that women are leading in fashion, but all major brands are men. But the brunt of expectations of carrying the fashion industry, which includes things, fashion has already impacted women, which means that it can sustain itself and continue production even if there is no push, right? Because there is already high amounts of demand and supply. Second, again, women feel over sexualized and are seen as the only representation of what fashion stands for, increasing increasing men participation is the way that fashion is represented, commercialized, and sold. It does two things. It brings relaxation due to lesser association of women and female sexuality with fashion, and secondly, it creates a gender fluid market where there is no binary of men and women. And so now all the market factors that Keshav comes and explains all unlock this point of representation, which I go ahead and wait, because having better accessibility is related to how you socially go ahead and change the market, how you socially go and impact the matter, which is why at the end of our case, both our economic and social benefits stand and unlock. With that,
Thank the government's whip for that speech. We invite the opposition whip to end the debate here.
Right, cool. Give me 1 second. Just wanna, oh wow, I'm super. Just want to confirm that I'm audible and visible. Maybe not so much visible because I look super bright, but yeah.
Yes, you are.
Brilliant. Cool. Give me 1 second. Let's get everything together. All right. Just in the meantime, hi everyone. My name is Shaanaav. Pronouns he, him. I take my POIs in the chat, and I will try to take at least one of you. Don't worry, before the protected time is up. Sure. Yes. Okay. All right. Right. You set the timer. Okay, cool. Starting my speech off in 3, 2, 1. I think this debate has, I think let me summarize into a very simple fact, right? We have government on one side talking about basically the practical benefits of getting men to industry, and you have opposition on one hand talking about why it is so much more important to include women, not just because of the economic benefits, but because there is a principle to it that is more important, in which we believe that women are, I think, a logically prior stakeholder who deserve more attention in terms of in terms of representation in the fashion industry. And secondly, we also believe women, this fashion industry is one of the best ways for them to actually get the sort of representation they need in terms of say inclusivity, say body positivity, which is so much more needed in today's society, right? What is one thing all sides have agreed? We have agreed that society tends to be more patriarchal. We tell you that because of this, there are many issues that have led to society probably having different standards for men. I think every side is agreed on this. Secondly, we also understand that the fashion industry tends to be women dominated. However, we tell you on our side, right? And this is something that Suraya has brought, and this is why we believe it's a very important piece of material to this debate, is that we've explained exactly how damaging patriarchy is to society, insofar that it actually ensures that these sort of norms are going to be held by, say, what men should dress or how women should dress. And we say at least the inclusion of women on our side is a lot more comparatively better for the reasons that Suraya mentioned, right? This means having more women in this industry inevitably means to say more women designers, more women as leaders in the fashion industry, and so on and so forth. And this means that women are better allowed to say have their problems met, right? This is not just a simple analysis like, say, body positivity, but rather the issues that Suraya talked about. This looks like having different clothing designs that are not following the male gaze. This looks like clothing that are, say, that are more inclusive towards, say, plus size women or women who wear hijabs. This looks like clothing that are more functional to what the women actually need rather than what men thinks of them. I think the biggest harm, right, and this is something that goes to both government benches, is that they completely kind of either mischaracterize or don't really deal with our worst case. They only talk about the best case and why it is so much better to have say economics of scale, so on and so forth. In my speech, I'm going to go and weigh against all of their points and explain to you why our side beats them, right? First up, CG, right? They come into this debate with a very pro-capitalistic stance, right? For them, they bring out a few pieces of arguments as to why it's so much better to have men, right? First up, they talk about how when you have more men included in there, because of the current status quo of men's clothes being expensive, it's going to allow, say, better jobs and so on and so forth, and it's going to have an economic ripple effect. Notice this, right? Two things, right? This is a very binary thing, because first off, it doesn't deal with the principle that we talk about. Even if, right, you say you get more employment, what is going to happen is that you're going to have these employments, because these are going to be man-centric products. They're going to alienate women, which is more women are going to be pushed out of the industry. And Suraya has already demonstrated why this is bad. Because first off, you're going to get the male gaze, more male gaze centered products, which means that the sort of freedom that women have enjoyed in the fashion industry, which is one of the only industries where they have been allowed, the representation they have. No, I'll take it in the chat. I told you already. It's something that is quite damaging for the reason that Suraya has already mentioned that compared to men, compared to women, men at least still have a lot more dominance in many different industries, say culinary, say real estate, say law, say sports, and so on and so forth. So we think on principle, it is much better on our side to kind of prioritize women. Secondly, we don't think this is damaging for the brand in the sense that this is a debate about major fashion brands, right? Which means that it's more likely that these major fashion brands already have some sort of profit, which means that they're not going to lose out much if they don't alienate men. But secondly, even if you say that, right, we don't think that men are going to be alienated per se, just not prioritized, which is how it is in status quo. And you already have cheap clothes, right? The advent of fast fashion, or just like many other types of retail brands, has allowed, brands like Uniqlo and so on and so forth to give out, say, a more affordable clothes even to men, even if they're not prioritized. This means that takes out all of CG's points and their benefits about, say, about benefiting minorities, benefiting poor people, and also in terms of employment growth, we tell you what is so much more harmful. We would much rather bite the bullet and say, no, we were okay with having less men in this industry, insofar it doesn't ensure that women are alienated or at least not kicked out of the industry, which is probably something that's more protective to them. Secondly, I'll go on to OG's case, right? OG's case, they live in a very utopian world, right? They believe that the world that exists in is now like women having some sort of like the same sort of power among men. Notice that Suraya has brought an important piece of framing in which even in this case, right, there is still a very patriarchal standard that is imposed onto men, right? Where women or men are still socially conditioned to feel a certain way, which is why you're very unlikely to even in the case that you kind of have like more pushback of a higher push in society towards men being, represented. It's probably going to be one that it's kind of dominant towards the straight male fashion, right? Okay, this is also something that CG brought up. They talked about how, you can have influencers and so on and so forth to push forward the idea of male fashion. Notice, right, that this sort of male fashion ideal tends to be more streetwear focused, tends to be more straight man focused, tends to not even be inclusive. So even if you buy them at their best case, right, both CG and OG, what is likely to happen is the people you're going to attract are only going to be the ones who follow the norms. So if you don't get the sort of creativity you talk about, insofar that you don't actually prove towards OG, how exactly they are incentivized to do so in the first place? How exactly they're going to break out of the patriarchal norms that they are stuck in the first place? Why exactly there's an incentive for these men that you talk about looking at people as feminine and gay, how this is actually going to lead to that sort of challenging of internal bias. The only thing they tell us, right, is that it's going to, when you normalize fashion for men, when you bombard people with this sort of information, it's going to lead people to feel like, okay, maybe it's not bad a certain way. But before that, I'll take a POI from either side.
Your case maybe
Uh,
defeats those in government insofar it proves their economic benefits inexclusive. But you still have to weigh up why women, or specifically niches within them, which have already had more representation within the fashion industry, deserve more representation.
I got it. I tell you this, right? We're not saying we're going to get more representation. What this motion is saying is that it's going to maintain status quo in which women still enjoy the same sort of representation they did before. Suraya has already mentioned to you why women need this a lot more than men, right? They need more functional clothing. They need more clothing that is more, less aware of the male gaze and more catered towards what they need. So we tell you that on your side, right? Your case doesn't stand because even if we don't prove all of these things, you still don't demonstrate to us how men are actually going to buy into this idea, and there is zero claim, zero way of you mechanizing or actually proving onto that, right? The only thing we get from, like I said, the only thing we get from you is that it's going to challenge internal bias, but absolutely nothing shown in that case. So on our side, when we weigh, we tell our side it's a lot more better because at least we still ensure that women are still protected. We still ensure that women still get their needs met, and we still ensure that, even if we don't get so many more innovation per se, we don't tell it's a bad thing insofar that women who are the most vulnerable people don't get their power stripped away. They don't get, they lose their modern jobs and so on and so forth. And this is so much better in the patriarchal society in this way, okay? Thirdly, on to OO. So OO side, I think the OO is probably the strongest side in this debate, but we think we come largely prior to them because they only give us, I think, a very basic fundamental idea of what, a patriarchal society is. Comparatively, Suraya has demonstrated why this patriarchy comes about, how it conditions people to think a certain way, and she's given better examples of how, at least on our side, we're going to get, she has demonstrated how you get better visibility or better like mechanization of the cyclical issues that exist in status quo. Second, this means we can co-opt all the benefits and we come in much more prior to them, insofar that we actually extend how inclusivity works. We talk about a lot more than that. And secondly, we also show you on our side what are the benefits of doing this, which I think come a lot more, which are a lot more logical prior to what OO brings forward. With that, very proud to.
We thank the opposition for that speech, and before the panel goes into deliberation, OG, who was the first speaker?
The first speaker was Moez.
Okay. Sahib was the first speaker, okay.
No, like Moez was the first speaker and I was the second speaker.
Okay, that's fine. OG, okay. Well, thank you guys for the round. We'll the panel will go into the judge room for deliberation, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you so much for a good debate. It was really fun.
Thanks for the.
Yeah, thank you for the debate, guys. Also watch The Devil.
I agree with that. Hi, sorry, Wendy. Why are we being recorded?
Sorry.
Hello guys, I want to know if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, so before I give the OA, I want to confirm if all teams are available before I start. So is OG here?
Yep, we're here.
Okay, is OO here?
Yeah, we are here.
Okay, is CG here?
Yeah, CG is here.
Is CO here?
CEO is here.
Okay, that's good. So with all teams present, I would start my OA. So it was a good deliberation with the panelists that were on board and came to a unanimous call. So we have, first of all, my OA is going to be in three structures. I'm going to give a general feedback on how I think the debate went. And the second thing I'm going to do is to give the rankings of the debate. And lastly, and I'm going to give the justifications for the rankings of the debate. So first, the general feedback on the debate. I think the debate was a good one. So it was I think there was a lot of engagement in the debate, which made the panel feel like, okay, people understood what the motion was about, and were able to necessarily give what you thought of it and engage it on the broader perspective. Now to rankings from first to fourth. We have CO, CG, OG, and OO. We have CO, CG, OG, and OO. Was that clear to everybody? Okay, I think it was clear. Okay, so it's CO, CG, OG, and OO. Now to the top half, why do we have OG beaten OO in today's debate? So the panel felt like OG necessarily was the side that was able to talk to us about how, at the end of the day, how they are going to be able to help or make sure that the vulnerable actors who are in today's debate do not feel left out. What does OG tell us? So OG in today's debate necessarily talk to us who their vulnerable actors look like. Talk about males who want to dress in a certain type of way but are not able to express themselves because of certain societal norms or certain societal ideologies that exist. What they say is that one, in a world where we allow this fashion brands to prioritize expanding of these fashion industries to include men, what you do is that one, you create an avenue of these vulnerable men in the society to be able to express themselves freely without feeling a level of restriction. What this means is that one, in their world, in as much as they accept that one, females are also like vulnerable, they still tell us how the existing structures have continuously been able to protect females and always give females the voice. So therefore, it is right to be able to give those vulnerable actors who are just a small minority and who still need to be able to express themselves, that opportunity to be expressed. What do we get from OO in today's debate? So OO necessarily, the panel feels like OO just sort of tells us why women are vulnerable. We don't get that idea of how this continuous prioritization for women is going to look like, or how in the long-term benefits is going to change anything that is already present in status quo. What we get from OG is a world where when you allow this thing to happen, you are going to be able to, like the negative, you just get the negatives. You're going to create a space for male models to override the females. You're going to create that avenue for that males to be seen as the bigger people. We think that what OG could have OO could have done in this case is to be able to show us how the protection of females in status quo is not enough and should be continuously prioritized over these males because of this and that, or because of certain things that exist in status quo. We get a world where we are not able to get that further explanation from opening opposition, so we are not able to really see how they place over opening governments. Now to the closing half, why do we think CO places over CJ in today's debate? We think the chunk of CJ's case, especially, focuses on that economic impact they get for the society. In as much as they still want to be able to protect the vulnerable actors in today's society, we are unable to get how all the mechanisms they bring or all the analysis they bring as to how there's going to be an increase in demand and there's going to be an increase in productivity is still able to benefit the vulnerable actors. What we get is how men are now going to get involved in these fashion businesses. When more men get involved in it, there's going to be an increase in demand. And what the increased demand means is that there's going to be an increase in productivity and an increase in employment. We think that at a point where we've already established that the most vulnerable actors in today's in each other's world is what we want to know how it benefits. In as much as we recognize that these economic impacts are also beneficial, we still needed some level of mechanism and some level of analysis on how these people are necessarily protected. We get from CO on how they are able to do this. How do they say this? So from CO, we get from them how when you have a larger male fashion industry, what you get is that you get the intrusion or like more men in this industry. What you do is that you take away that more female representation in that industry. What happens when you take away that more female representation? It means that less eyes are on the female fashion brands, so you're unable to protect the females in their world or the minority or the vulnerable actors in their world. Therefore, you're not able to necessarily have that impact that you want on the vulnerable states. That is why we have CO over CJ. Why do we think CO places over every team's CO places over OG still in today's debate? We think that one, CO still places over OG, that's the long diagonal, in today's debate because of certain reasons. One, we think CO is able to talk to us about how inclusion or sending the shift to the male fashion industry is going to be detrimental. One, CO tells us about how these markets look like and how enforcing these patriarchy systems necessarily is looking like. They tell us about how damaging the patriarchy system looks, not just to the minority, but to everyone at large. What you do when you create a cycle where you allow these men to consistently be in the limelight, they tend to start to predict what women should even wear because now they have that dominance over the fashion industry. At that point in time, we think CO is able to show us how the necessity of not over prioritizing these men look like. Now, why do we think still we have CJ placing above OO in today's debates? We think CJ still places above OO because I think OO sort of has that limitation over who they are protecting. We think OO sort of does not necessarily explain to us how in their world they are going to be able to still gain that benefits, marginal continuous benefits, and how that benefits is even better, and how the society or the world is even made better with that continuous prioritization of the fashion industry. So we think CJ still has that edge over OO because of the scale of impact and the magnitude that they reach in today's debate. They are able to reach a larger audience. They are able to gain much more benefits for a larger number of people. On that note, the rankings are CO, CJ, OG, and OO. You can reach out to me for personal feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the evaluation. Thank you everyone for the debate.
Thank you, everyone.